Hello and welcome to the Voices That Stay With You, Fraud, Emotion and AI. In this podcast, we explore how voices, human and artificial, can influence trust, shape decisions and sometimes deceive. As AI blurs the lines between real and synthetic speech, we unpack the risks of voice-based fraud, the tech behind it and what it means for you. The two other voices you'll hear, who will definitely stay with you, are leading authorities on voice intelligence and cybersecurity. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mike Pappas, CEO and co-founder of Modulate, the solution that turns voice conversations into real-time intelligence that prevents fraud, protects communities, and improves customer experience, and Jane Frankland, cybersecurity author, speaker, and influencer with nearly 30 years experience in cyber, including founding the first female-owned hacking firm. Mike, Jane, thank you very much for joining us.
It's amazing to be here. It's great to speak to you, Russ and Mike.
Excellent. So, in the world of cyber, we talk a lot about data, fraud, and AI, but this conversation is all about voices. When you guys think about the voice channel right now, what feels most different to you compared to even a couple of years ago?
I'm happy to start. Apologies. I'll say, the obvious of there are now synthetic voices. That is fundamentally a new thing. I think a lot of focus has come into the idea of deepfakes and synthetic voices that imitate specific individuals. But I want to start broader than that. You can use synthetic voices for a lot of purposes, both legitimate and fraudulent. And so we see more consumers using AIs to call on their behalf, to book a reservation at a restaurant, to speak to customer service, to try and get a subscription canceled. We see, of course, more customer support agencies using AIs to respond to those human beings. And then, of course, you have the fraudsters that are trying to use AIs not just to sound like a specific person, but to execute a proven playbook systematically thousands of times a second. So there's a whole changing ecosystem as we transfer from the world where voice is the way that people talk to each other to a world where voice is a way that technology can speak to each other as well.
And I think, that's also so relevant, but I think for me, it's really about how we think about trust, because that's changed. If you think about 3 or 4 years ago, voice still carried this kind of implicit trust. We assumed that the person on the other end of a phone or the internet, were who they said they were going to be. And especially when you couple that with video as well, which, often is the case now. So for me, it's really, I think about how trust has shifted and how that kind of assumption that someone on the end of a call or a line or a meeting like this is who they say they are. And what we've seen in cyber, we've seen this democratization of hacking. And obviously that includes like voice cloning. And it's to the point where it's not just sophisticated hackers or nation state threat actors who are doing this. This is teenagers using the right app. And I think what Mike says about it being used in so many different scenarios, not just obviously like hacking or cybercrime or nation state attacks, it's really, really hard to know what is true and what is not, what is real and what is not. And I think one of the best examples that I've seen about this fairly recently actually was with the elections in India, where they went out to billions of people or millions of people. I can't remember what the exact figures are, but they went out and they were using these technologies as part of their campaigns. So they were legitimate campaigns, and they were using sometimes dead politicians to advocate for them. So we've kind of got this. It's not even as if you're using technology and you know that that's going to be not real or fake. It's you're being asked to use it. Then is it true or is it not? So this whole kind of notion of trust, I think, is getting really interesting. Who do you trust and not? And how can you tell? Because the technology is just becoming so good so fast.
And Russ, I promise not to get too carried away prematurely, but one comment I want to add on that is I of course, Jane, agree with what you're saying, and there's a weird twist in which I want to say like something kind of good came out of it, and that literally a decade ago, I was effectively going door to door at some of the major banks and saying, "My voice is not my password. Please
Yes.
stop it. Please don't do that. It's not going to be secure," and
Yeah.
trying to sort of issue the early warning. And at the time, it wasn't really well received. People didn't understand that voice was not this fundamentally secure thing. So, am I happy that it's now kind of been broken open? Of course not. But I
Yeah.
am in some ways happy that it seems like people are becoming more aware and thinking more critically about which things they can trust and under which conditions. And of course,
Mm.
ironically, as that, synthetic technology has gotten better, certain techniques for detecting synthetic voices have also gotten better.
Yeah.
So, you know, a failure, I guess, or a missed expectation of 10 years ago, Mike, is that I truly thought it was going to be 100% impossible. And now Modulate is one of the vendors that has actually figured out, oh, there are still ways to tell this stuff apart. There are still ways to rely on voice if you really want to. It's just gotten a lot more finessed than we might have expected it to need to be. And there's a lot more nuance in that question of which voices can you trust and why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if we now exist in this topsy-turvy world where we can't trust what we hear, we don't know if a voice is a real voice or a synthetic voice, and we can't even use our own voice as a password, there's obviously duty of care issues that come into things there. So if I'm a business leader, if I'm someone that's in charge of fraud prevention, I'm someone that's in charge of protecting their business or ensuring a great customer experience, what do I as a business leader need to be paying attention to right now, and where do I need to be setting my sights in the future with this?
Jane, do you want to take
Yeah.
first crack at this one?
Yeah, I think really, as far as I'm concerned, it really has to be that, your team has to reliably be able to tell the difference between what a real voice is and a synthetic one. And the reality is right now they can't. The technology is just getting better and better. And I think certainly when it comes to AI and the innovation that is going on, we're not talking months anymore. We're talking weeks. It's just moving that fast. So, with that in mind, none of us we can't consistently, and especially if we're under pressure and certainly, when these things are happening at scale and speed, we can't consistently like tell the difference. That one's real, that one's fake. And then there's all the psychological pressures that are usually wrapped around it, when it comes to social engineering. So even though we will train people and we'll tell them to trust their gut instinct, all of those are necessary, and we must continue, with those. We can improve certainly upon the training that is out there, that human risk management piece. But I do think we've moved beyond just relying on those two things. And I think really right now we've got to be relying, on technology to help us, spot the fraud that is currently slipping through. And I believe will just get worse, certainly next year and beyond. So I mentioned social engineering a minute ago. It's definitely a blind spot, that emotional and the behavioral cues. So, when we think about voice and the voice channels, it's not just about content, it's about tone, it's about pace, it's about agitation and intent. And those signals, tell us, whether someone may be distressed, they may be deceptive or escalating. So really for me, it's that most organizations aren't capturing that intelligence at all. So the blind spot isn't necessarily awareness, it's actually capability and scale. And so leaders need to know that there is risk in the voice channel, that more of it is coming. And I believe that they don't have the tools to see it yet, or they don't know about the tools that are existing.
So many great comments there that I want to build off of. First off, I'll certainly agree. It's not a matter of are people talented or not. It's just a matter of human beings cannot tell the difference between these voices at this point. Modulate put together a little deepfake detective game. If I remember right, the current high score in that game is something like 40%. These voices are just too hard for normal people to tell the difference, even though there are reliable ways for technology to out them. But I also want to hammer on something that you were saying towards the end there, Jane, about so many organizations are missing tonality and all of these extra pieces. And I completely agree. That's something that you lose if you're just transcribing what's being said, or maybe you transcribe and also try and run a deepfake detector, but then you're still missing all of this other incredibly valuable information to understand what's actually happening in this conversation. And sometimes that is sort of tone of voice to understand what is the pressure being applied through this kind of social engineering tactic. We also see what you might sort of call shallow fakes in different cases. So the number of calls where there is the same recording of my baby crying in the background that is being used to create that kind of sense of social pressure, it's actually kind of shocking. And that's not, AI generated. We literally could be looking for, is it the same one recording? We don't have to be, but you can tell, hey, that baby is crying in a different room in a way that has been differently digitally processed than the human being who is speaking right now. Clearly something is amiss here, but you can only do that if you're looking at the audio signal directly, not just at the transcription side.
I think that's fascinating as well, what you talk about, Mike, because everyone's heard the term deepfake, but that's the first time I'm hearing the term shallow fake.
Yes, me too.
So how are you seeing sort of this play out? Are deeper fakes getting shallower? Are shallow fakes getting deeper? Is there a mid-level fake that's emerging as well? I think it's really, especially when we talk about this in terms of hackers, fraudsters, whatever, trying to find those emotional hooks and triggers to, as you talked about, Jane, socially engineer people to do something they may not quite be ready or want to do. I thought that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't necessarily say deepfakes and shallow fakes are converging. They are two fundamentally different techniques, but I'll say they're overlapping more and more. So what we see is, if you go back a year or so ago, people had pretty good deepfake detectors that could just reliably say this is a synthetic voice.
Yeah.
Today, you see a lot of the providers that were successful a year ago actually backing out of this space, explicitly giving up and saying we're no longer able to do this. The primary reason for that is that fraudsters have gotten smarter about how they deploy deepfakes, not that deepfakes have gotten so much better. And in particular, it's this fusion of I'm going to create a deepfake voice, and then I'm going to use, you can call it shallow faking or just DSP technology to add the sound of a subway in the background, make it sound like it's coming through a poor Wi-Fi signal. And suddenly those artifacts that were evidence that it's a synthetic voice, now you're no longer so sure because there's all these other sort of noise issues that make it much more plausible that this is a legitimate caller. The reason that Modulate has had success entering the space at this point is that our original expertise was not solely on the way voices are synthesized, but is also very much on that audio side of what is authentic background noise. We have seen, just from our starting place in gaming a while ago, we've collected hundreds of millions of hours of video gamers shouting at each other from the lowest quality microphones you can ever imagine with all kinds of background noise. And it's given us a really rich understanding of, oh, that's what it actually sounds like when your voice is being processed through a low quality phone. That's what it actually sounds like when there's 500 extra noises happening in the background. And that's allowed us much more accurately to note those small inconsistencies, like how the baby's voice is coming from a different room than the voice of the speaker or something like that, that allow us to say something isn't quite connecting the dots here. So the fraudsters are not, creating a mid fake or something like that, but they are combining techniques of deep fakes and shallow fakes to create something that no singular solution can capture. You need a solution that can look at both these sort of synthetic signals as well as the DSP audio quality, sort of what's real signals, in order to actually accurately identify which calls are fraudulent.
Mm. So I guess, and with that, so are we now in a place where humans just can't do this anymore? Are we now at a place where the fraudsters have got so good, the technology is so sophisticated, and sort of the deep and the shallow and everything being brought in? Are we in kind of a post-human world in terms of detecting this voice fraud now, do you think?
I was going to agree until you said post-human. I think, as both Jane and I have noted before, we are in a world where humans cannot differentiate between a synthetic voice and a human voice reliably. That does not mean there is no longer a role for human beings. There are still a lot of ways that we want humans in the loop throughout this process, both to just create a positive experience for an end user and be understanding their emotional state in ways that Modulate is one of a few companies working on, but AI cannot replicate the emotionality of a human being in the way that we want to for that great customer experience. But it's also, it might be that we'll find even a decade or two from now that the best solution for reliable process is augmenting a human being with the right kind of technology rather than replacing them outright. We see, for instance, when social engineering comes up again, today you have issues where, an empathetic human hears this sob story and says, oh, well, I really want to help, so I'm going to try and find a way to work around it. Sometimes we find something as simple as Modulate flashing something up on the screen saying, hey, we've detected some potential signs of fraud here. And what's actually happening is the agent also detected those potential signs of fraud. They also knew that there was some risk here, but their empathy was kind of overriding their sense in that moment. And they were willing to sort of make a compromise and say, well, I really don't want to be screwing this person over. And suddenly seeing that sort of objective feeling technical statement of actually this call has already been logged as potential fraud, it can both sort of stiffen their spine. And if you want to make it a little bit more negative, it kind of reminds them that someone's watching too. And like, hey, do you really want to be the person who broke policy for a probable fraud call? Or do you want to say, hey, if I really want to help this person, I need to escalate it up because I can't be the one to make this decision at this point? And so without needing the AI to make the decision, AI can actually help human beings much more effectively adhere to the policies that can work pretty well if we are using them reliably.
But I think what you said there is really interesting, because I would agree with all of that, but I want to add something else. I mean, I think at the moment we've got different levels of voice technology out there, voice cloning technology. Some, I've tried some myself, and it's just like that obviously does not sound like me, but some is really good. So I think right now we still have the varying quality in terms of what's available, but it's actually to a point that you've just made right now. I think we've got to be really, really careful and make sure that we're using this technology and educating our workforces and certainly the leaders, the CEOs in those companies, and actually making the point that all of this technology is not about surveillance. Because you were talking about, do you want to be the person who went against policy, when the technology flagged up, this might be someone trying to trick you, fraud, et cetera, because surveillance is about control, but real-time voice intelligence and all of this integration and this support is about protection. And it's about protecting customers from fraud, protecting staff from abuse, and protecting brands from reputational harm. And I think that's a really important point that we need to make sure that we are making and educating so that we get this empowerment, we get this confidence, and we get this support and this psychological safety. Because without it, we risk more. We're going to make more mistakes, and we're not going to catch the risks that we need to.
Absolutely. And that, one of the other ways that we work with a number of folks on this is providing that same sense of objectivity around how bad the call was that the agent just experienced. We're finding in sort of modern day, more and more call centers have some kind of policy around, hey, if you just had a really rough call, you can take a minute break before you jump back into the fray, or small concessions, but meaningful. But it turns out most agents are really uncomfortable actually leveraging those resources because they worry, was that really a bad enough call to qualify? Am I going to look weak if I choose to use this extra break? Am I still going to be graded against these numbers because it's sort of informal that I'm given this license to do it? Whereas if you have an objective system saying, hey, that call was just an 8.3 out of 10 in terms of the aggression scale, and your policy says anything above a 7.5 means you are allowed to go take a break now. Suddenly, in some sense, it's taken the decision out of the human's hands, but that's a really good thing. That's actually giving them more autonomy and more sort of sense of control and sense of safety because they know whether or not they are allowed to use these resources.
That's such a great point that you made. And also sometimes it can be helping to educate as well. I'm thinking of an instance where there was a really it was a terrible cyber attack that happened, and I'm not going to mention any names at all. But certainly, when a cyber attack happens, everything is like everyone kind of rallies round, and it's a 24/7, scenario where everyone's working around the clock and everyone pulls out weight and everyone goes above and beyond. And this one particular attack that happened this year, they worked through it, they recovered, might even still be recovering. But at no point did the CEO come down and thank the individuals, who worked. And so when you've got technology can actually be used to educate, to train in that kind of behavior. But I really like the point that you made from a reducing risk perspective and just taking time out and kind of pushing that psychological safety. You are safe to go and take a break. And I think when that's coupled with the awareness side of things, if you don't, then these types of things can happen. It can be really beneficial.
Yeah. And I guess what we're kind of feeding into there is, I guess, a wider conversation around company and business culture as well. It's seeing these businesses take the voice channel and all the logical and emotional components of that as one, and seeing what the impact is on the individual, on the team, on the business, on compliance and risk and the fraud posture for the organization as a whole as well. So I guess that kind of makes me then think around, okay, if you're again in that senior leadership type position, what do you need to be doing? What behaviors do you need to be modeling and demonstrating to ensure that the correct culture exists within a business to realize what's happening and take this seriously as a phrase I always love saying, a threat vector for an organization?
Can I start with take some support calls? Like if you are in any way overseeing that side of your team, you need to actually understand the experience of having these calls, having to move so fast, having to understand what's going on, having to make these split-second decisions. It is really easy for executives to completely fail to empathize with this stuff. And tying to that, I think it's really important that you look at your team systemically, not as, let me try and find the individual weak link, especially because of the way fraud is itself becoming more and more systemic these days. So we see a lot of fraudsters now doing coordinated attacks, and we're going to reach out to 3 different lines at 8 different call centers of yours, all basically simultaneously, and try the same similar tactics in each place. And surely we're going to get through in one of these and get kind of the information that we need. And from that standpoint, you can look and say, okay, well, 24 people picked up the phone and only one of them was fooled. That one person is the weak link. Let's get rid of them. But I don't think that's right, because first of all, everyone has some way that they're going to be the weak link, right? Maybe it's just you had a bad day. Maybe it's that story really personally impacted you. And if these fraudsters are trying this kind of coordinated shotgun approach, they're inevitably going to find something there. But if instead you're looking at that and saying, hey, why are we allowing fraudsters to coordinated shotgun our entire agency anyways? What if there are things that we can do at the system level to prevent those kinds of coordinated attacks? And that is you as a leader being more immediately aware that you're not just getting one suspicious call right now, but you're actually getting 20, and having ways to disseminate that back out to your agents in real time so that they're able to do something about it. It's about giving kinds of trainings and having escalation lines so that when people are suspicious, it's not just on each of the 24 of them, but that there's different ways they can be working together to solve what sort of to unpack whether something is in fact fraudulent or what kind of attack you're currently under. So that's a bit of a rambly answer, but I'd basically say you as a leader, your job is to actually understand the ecosystem that your agents are working within, and treating that as something that you can just intuitively model without ever trying it yourself, and that each individual is kind of out fighting on their own, I think are 2 of the most dangerous assumptions that I see people making.
I mean, you just brought up so many interesting things there, because what I would also add to this is like cybersecurity is about reducing risk, and it's about mindset as well. So certainly from a leadership perspective, they've got to take that on board, and we've got to move it from it being a blame and shame culture and accept that really it's about resilience. We can't stop all attacks. Some of them are going to get through because we have just so many coming at us, so many ways in. And the other thing I want to bring up is the shared responsibility. Cybersecurity is a team sport. It's about sharing the responsibility and embedding it into the organization. So and unless we do that, we are going to fail every single time. And the breaches that happen are going to be, there's going to be more of them, and they're going to be more impactful. We're not going to recover it as fast. So it has to be, leaders have to get it. And I love the fact that you said, like, come into the call centers here, just understand, what's going on. And I really think more leaders need to be more in touch with their workforce anyway, to effectively be walking the shop floor as such, so they understand the environment, and also so that they're not detached from it. They're more accessible. And we have to have all of that wrapped around the psychologically safe environment in order to do a better job of reducing the risks, and importantly, recovering faster from them, and without the financial impact and the human impact, the cost emotionally, energetically, and so on, that accompanies them, which is often forgotten.
Mm. Obviously, we're talking about fraud through the voice channel, and part of that is all around, we talked about culture and trust, but I guess the flip side of that culture and trust thing is, I guess, the more hard and fast compliance legislation regulations that are coming in as well. So if we're looking at how to protect businesses and ensure things run smoothly in this new AI infused world, what do business leaders, decision makers need to be aware of in terms of that shift in compliance and legislation regulation landscape?
Well, for me, it's like, I think really it's the role that regulators are playing now. So it is accelerating. And I know so many of us, certainly in cyber, may kind of groan and kind of go, oh my gosh, more regulation. because it's really hard to keep on top of it with so much coming through. But it is a good thing. It really can support businesses out there. It can really help to drive risk reduction and support leaders out there who are really championing this and kind of trying to get budget and things like that. So we're seeing a real shift globally in terms of this. So, for example, like the EU AI Act and the UK Online Safety Act, they're moving organizations from a reactive model where you deal with harm after it's occurred to a proactive one. So leaders now have to prove that they're preventing harm in the first place, especially in environments with voice chat or phone interactions. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And certainly we were talking about duty of care earlier. So it's a really massive shift in that duty of care. And I think that the second thing that the leaders really need to be aware of is AI transparency. And this is a really good thing, and it's so needed right now. So if you consider the EU AI Act and the new rules being developed in the US, California, for example, then they're saying very clearly, if you are using AI in a high risk space like fraud detection or behavioral analysis, then it can't be a black box. So you now have to be able to show what it is made of, i.e. the SBOM, the software bill of materials, how it works, how it was tested, and how you're mitigating bias. And I think this is a really good thing, because if you cannot explain your AI, you won't be able to defend your decisions. And then the third thing that I'm going to say, and I think this is really overlooked, is, and again we talked about this before, is that human side. The humans on both sides of the conversation. Certainly when it comes to a duty of care, because Mike said we're seeing this the aggression escalate towards some of the frontline staff in contact centers. We're seeing distress signals from vulnerable customers go completely unnoticed, and that's where the tools can really come in and be supportive. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I see things.
Yeah, lots of great stuff to bounce off there, Jane. I'll say on the sort of AI transparency piece, this is why I get so frustrated when people use AI to mean LLM and vice versa.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
different kinds of AI techniques out there that are in fact not black boxes. Again, Modulate, having started in the trust and safety space, we've worked under things like the Online Safety Act for a long time. We've had to build all of our techniques to be able to say not just, hey, we think this is harassment, hey, we think this is fraud, but here are the components of that decision. Here's why we believe that. Give you as a human the ability to audit that. Again, Modulate's approach to this is we never want the AI just unilaterally making the decision. We want it to show you, here's what we think is happening and why, so that you can make those decisions more effectively. I think it's really, really important to be building your systems that way, of course, for regulatory reasons, but also, as we going back to an earlier part of the conversation, for agent training purposes, right? You want your agents to understand what they're doing, to be a part of the process, to be able to think and hopefully up-level your technology by pointing out where the decision-making might have some flaws. They can't do any of that if they're just getting ChatGPT says this is fraud, can it? So you need to be a little bit more discerning than that. The other thing that I'll call out is a lot of these regulatory requirements include, detailed logging and tracking of all of these different decisions. That is also an area where, once again, AI cannot do it for you, but can massively simplify the process. And we see right now a lot of folks are saying, hey, once you wrap up a call, you, the agent, need to go through the formal documentation and notate up everything here. And that takes a lot of time. It's really kind of emotionally exhausting. It's not a very pleasant task. Not that a lot of fielding these calls is often that pleasant. But this is something where AI summarization has gotten quite sophisticated. It's relatively straightforward to give you, hey, here is the automatically generated report at the end of this call. We thought there was fraud for these reasons. But once again, for both regulatory reasons and just general best practice, do not just submit the thing the AI wrote. Again, there's different ways to build AIs. LLMs, full of hallucinations, you really need to double check. But even systems like Modulate is built that don't have hallucinations might just be missing some details that the human picked up on that we weren't able to. So it's important to still have that human review. But if you can turn that from 5 minutes of documenting something up to 30 seconds of scanning over the report and making sure that it's misrepresentative, it's a huge change in what the compliance burden ends up being on your platform.
So, Mike, Jane, a fascinating conversation. I've learned so much from both of you in this the short time we've been speaking. I guess just any final thoughts from you guys as the voices that we want to stay with our listeners around fraud, emotion, and AI. What are those key things that you want people to take away from this conversation?
If I can start, I would basically say don't treat fraud analysis in voice as its own separate sort of side topic. Think instead about how you understand voice content. Most platforms need to do this, not just for fraud prevention, but as we've talked about, for things like protecting agent well-being and supporting their training process, understanding the customer satisfaction on a call and thinking about routing. Even in some cases, there's compliance under things like the FCA that require you to recognize vulnerable users and handle those calls differently. So rather than trying to say we're going to get 4 or 5 different tools to analyze each of these different kinds of problems, start by saying, how do I just know what's going on in my voice calls? How do I understand what's happening in the voice content overall? And that allows you to pinpoint with much greater precision what are the most urgent problems? What kinds of fraud are you subject to? How does that relate to customer experience when you're adding fraud or when you're adding friction to prevent fraud, but it delays the customer from getting what they need when they're legitimate? How do you make those trade-offs? It all comes down to there's only one call happening. And so you should have one unified tool understanding the outcomes of those calls before you start trying to build overly specialized technology to solve that problem. And of course, I'm obligated to say Modulate is one of those solutions that can help you with that. But even if you're not directly working with us, I think it's essential to have that centralized understanding of what's going on.
That is great advice, because what I was going to say, certainly from a cyber perspective, is don't be a stranger. Be a servant leader and go out and understand your business environment. And that means going and getting out into the organization and understanding what's going on. So find out about the job, be a giver rather than a taker or a control freak. We need controls, but we've got to get the buy-in. So all of this is in part collaboration. Yes, there is some enforcement, there are some penalties, but seek to understand, because then you are going to understand, you better understand the threat, the exposure that you have, and not miss risks that are there. So in this case, it is about being a collaborative partner and serving your employees and really understanding the risk, rather than being quite, I would say, binary. This is how we do things. This is how it's always done. Threats are evolving. So you really need to understand the environment and make sure that there is that collaboration, that the workforce can approach you and they know what to do. So, Mike, you've given some really good pointers there.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you both so much for taking part in this podcast. So a massive thank you to Mike Pappas, CEO and co-founder of Modulate, and Jane Frankland, cybersecurity author, speaker, and influencer. Thank you both very, very much.
Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Mike.